Today we'll explore Herman Melville's Benito Cereno, a novella that challenges the stability of social hierarchy and exposes the ignorance and arrogance that uphold oppressive systems. Let's begin by setting the stage for this complex tale. Benito Cereno was first published in 1855 in Putnam's Monthly Magazine during a period of intense social and political unrest in America. Slavery was still legal, yet debates about abolition were reaching a boiling point. Herman Melville, who had already earned a reputation for his complex narratives like Moby Dick, used this novella to critique the ideologies that underpin slavery. Stylistically, Benito Cereno draws heavily from the Gothic tradition. Gothic literature often delves into themes of fear, ambiguity, and the unknown, using unsettling atmospheres and unreliable perspectives to explore darker truths about humanity. In Benito Cereno, we see several hallmarks of this genre. First, there's the unreliable narrator in Captain Delano. Delano's perspective dominates the narrative, and his inability to grasp the reality of rebellion creates a sense of mounting tension for the reader. This narrative technique places us in Delano's shoes while also keeping us in the dark, amplifying the novella's mysterious and foreboding tone. Next, we find elements of stream of consciousness, a technique Melville uses to immerse us in Delano's wandering thoughts. His mind shifts between admiration for the apparent loyalty of the enslaved people, suspicion of Benito Cereno himself, and confidence in his own perceptions. This fragmented inner monologue mirrors the chaotic and oppressive atmosphere aboard the San Dominique, while also revealing Delano's flawed worldview. The mysterious tone is another defining feature. From the moment Delano boards the San Dominique, the ship is depicted as decaying, a ghostly vessel. Melville describes it as appearing whitewashed, yet weathered, like a monastery after a storm, laden with melancholy, setting the stage for a narrative steeped in unease and ambiguity. The Gothic atmosphere intensifies with cryptic details, Sereno's strange behavior, the eerie silence among the enslaved people, and Babo's quiet but ever present role as Sereno's shadow. Finally, the novella's use of hidden truths aligns with its Gothic tradition. Gothic narratives often hinge on gradual revelation of a secret, and Benito Cereno, the ultimate truth, the rebellion, is concealed beneath layers of misdirection and Delano's ignorance. The climactic unveiling of Babo's role and the suppressed violence aboard the ship shock both Delano and the reader, forcing a confrontation with the brutal realities of slavery. These Gothic elements aren't just stylistic choices, they serve Melville's broader critique. By immersing the reader in fear, ambiguity, and unreliable perception, Melville mirrors the deceptions and moral blindness that uphold systems of oppression. In this way, Benito Cereno is not only a Gothic tale, but also a scathing indictment of the ideologies and hierarchies that define its time. Now let's jump into some major themes. One of the most striking themes in Benito Cereno is the fallacy of social hierarchy. Captain Delano, our unreliable narrator, is a perfect example of how ingrained prejudice blinds individuals to the realities around them. He assumes a tiered hierarchy of power, white men, particularly Americans like himself, at the top, Spaniards whom he views as weaker and less competent just below him, and enslaved black individuals at the bottom, so far removed from agency in his mind that he doesn't even consider them capable of rebellion. This ignorance is Delano's fatal flaw. His ego and hubris lead him to overlook the peculiarities on the San Dominique. He dismisses Captain Sereno's nervous behavior as a sign of Spanish inferiority, and never suspects Babo, the enslaved servant who's orchestrating the entire situation. Melville uses this to expose the unstable foundation of slavery. Delano's inability to see Babo as a full, intelligent human being demonstrates how racism supports the illusion of control, even when that control is entirely lost. The San Dominique, a ship literally in rebellion, mirrors a societal instability of slavery itself, unsustainable and violent at its core. Scholars have often pointed out how Melville critiques not only the institution of slavery, but the psychological mechanisms that allow it to persist. Critics like Eric Sundquist and others argue that the novella reveals the self-delusions of those who uphold oppressive systems. Next, I wanted to talk about some parallels between characters and their countries of origin, and also the routes that they took in the story itself. One of the most fascinating aspects of Benito Cereno is how the characters serve as symbolic representations of their countries of origin. Scholars have explored this allegorical layer in depth, with literary historian Richard Gray noting that the novella integrates the American optimism of its narrator and the European pessimism of its protagonist, Cereno under the shadow of slavery. This insight supports the interpretation that Melville uses these characters to critique not just the individuals, but the nations and ideologies they represent. Captain Delano embodies a new America, young, brash, and naive. His ignorance of the instability underlying the Saint Dominique mirrors America's broader refusal to confront the contradictions of slavery during Melville's time. Delano's self assured optimism and misplaced confidence reflect a national ego, blind to the moral and societal cost of the peculiar institution. Benito Cereno, in contrast, symbolizes the decaying Spanish Empire, once a colonial powerhouse, but by Melville's era a shadow of its former self. His frailty and inability to maintain control over the ship reflect the crumbling authority of a system that has relied on the exploitation of slaves for far too long. Gray's analysis reminds us that Sereno's decline is not just personal, it's emblematic of an empire's moral and structural collapse. Finally, Babo emerges as the most dynamic and subversive character, symbolizing the underestimated agency of the oppressed. Scholars have noted how Melville's depiction of Babo aligns with the broader historical resistance to slavery. The more Captain Delano dismisses Babo as passive, obedient servant, the more power Babo exerts, orchestrating a rebellion that dismantles the very hierarchies that Delano takes for granted. Beyond the characters, the route of the Saint Dominique itself serves as a powerful allegory for the westward expansion of slavery. As Alexandra Ganser discusses in her article, From the Black Atlantic to the Bleak Pacific, the journey through both Caribbean and Pacific location emphasizes transoceanic culture exchanges and the broader implications of slavery's reach. The Saint Dominique's passage westward mirrors the historical westward expansion of slavery in the United States, a journey marked by despair, instability, and the eventual moments of reckoning. In this interpretation, the imperfect and treacherous voyage of the Saint Dominique foreshadows the westward movement of slavery into territories like California. California's statehood in 1850 catalyzed the intense national debates, contributing to the South's eventual secession and the Civil War. The rebellion aboard the Saint Dominique, culminating in violent upheaval, symbolizes the inevitability of conflict when a system built on oppression attempts to expand beyond its limits. By embedding these themes into the ship's journey, Melville critiques not only the institution of slavery, but also the historical and cultural forces that sustained it and extended it. To deepen our understanding of Benito Cereno, it's helpful to compare it with another text that addresses similar themes. One compelling comparison is with Frederick Douglass's Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, written in 1845. Both works, though vastly different in form and tone, highlight the inherent fallacies of slavery and the way it corrupts both the oppressor and the oppressed. In Frederick Douglass's narrative, it provides a first-hand account of the horrors of slavery, exposing its dehumanizing effects and the lengths to which enslaved individuals must go to reclaim their humanity. Douglass reveals that the power dynamics of slavery are maintained through violence, ignorance, and manipulation, paralleling the themes Melville explores through Babo's rebellion aboard the Saint Dominique. Both texts challenge their hierarchical worldview that places white men at the top, but they do so in different ways. Douglass dismantles these hierarchies through explicit, lived experience, while Melville uses a fictional narrative to show the absurdity and instability of such a worldview. For instance, Captain Delano's utter blindness to the rebellion echoes the way many white Americans ignored or choose to ignore the moral contradictions of slavery in Douglass's lifetime. While Douglass emphasizes the resilience and humanity of enslaved individuals, Melville creates a more ambiguous moral landscape. In Benito Cereno, Babo's rebellion is both a necessary act of resistance and a harrowing reminder of the violence that slavery inevitably produces. This duality forces readers to confront the brutal consequences of a system built on oppression and exploitation. My personal reflection of the legacy of Melville's story, I've personally found the comparison eye-opening. While Douglass's narrative is grounded in stark realism, Melville's Gothic approach adds a layer of psychological complexity. The haunting atmosphere of Benito Cereno complements the stark truths of Douglass's work, together presenting a fuller picture of slavery's pervasive evils. The juxtaposition also sheds light on the lasting relevance of Melville's novella. Contemporary readers might find Delano's ignorance frustrating, even infuriating, but that frustration is the point. It forces us to consider how the same kind of complacency and prejudice persist in different forms today. When we compare this to Douglass's direct appeal for action and change, Benito Cereno becomes a chilling reminder of the dangers of passive complicity. The novella's legacy is also fascinating. Melville's critique of social hierarchy and his exploration of rebellion and power dynamics have inspired countless interpretations over the years. Scholars have examined the text through the lenses of race, gender, and even empire, finding new layers of meaning in ambiguity and complexity. It's a work that rewards careful reading and continues to resonate in a world still grappling with inequality and a systemic oppression. Ultimately, Benito Cereno isn't just a story about a single rebellion on a ship. It's a story about the fragility of human systems and the moral blindness that sustains them. And that, for me, is what makes it so powerful and so important to revisit today. Thank you for listening to these segments, and I hope that you learned something, if not about Benito Cereno and the story itself, but the influences that blindness and arrogance and ignorance have on our larger systemic issues. Hopefully, we can delve more into these types of themes and topics and open up the conversation around systemic racism and the fallacies of hierarchical societies. So, once again, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.